Hello, everyone. This is going to be our disguised history podcast. My name is Dominic Martinez, and I'll be discussing this topic with Alexis and Kim. So, to begin, I just want to say that throughout the semester, we have listened to several different podcasts that have all given us their take on the readings and ideas we are discussing in class. By utilizing these podcasts, I feel that we have been able to connect our current society to the history we may have not seen clearly or correctly. The discussion about indigenous groups and their struggles was something I believe was not touched upon the way we have ever seen, and that was connected back to our current society and the current effects of the past through examples given in the podcast. I believe that the podcast provided us with a deeper realization of the effects of these different histories, and the podcast have also given true stories and connections rather than us reading about it. And we were able to hear from someone and hear their story and their emotions expressed. I also believe that through the podcast, we grew strategies for expressing how we feel by listening to the podcast. We also saw that expressing emotions can be safe, but altogether, I feel that podcasts were a great learning tool for us moving forward. And I also want to pass it on to Kim and have her give her take on this.
Hi, I'm Kim, and I just want to say thank you, Dominic, for that. I'm just gonna go over what I have to say about the first section. When talking about how different podcasts were able to give different strategies for us students, I definitely have to say that that's true. The reason I say that is because in the beginning of each of the podcasts, he would always check in, he, meaning the professor, would always check in to see how everyone's doing. And I would have to say that's really nice because I feel like we're able to have that like sense of connection with him, even though like we've never really met him in person and just like we haven't really like been able to like communicate any other way besides like virtually. But just having that like mental health check is always really nice. And like just being able to like hear his voice and just discuss about different topics was really nice too. Now connecting to the second section, I would have to say that Raul Peck, sorry if I said his name wrong, talks about how once the whole American race was being made, it would get rid of all the other races, and in a way, it kind of did. I say kind of just because uh we were able to see it in different ways by the profit of African American people being sold, and nowadays connecting it to immigration and how, depending on where that person immigrated from, uh, can be seen as bad. And when I say that, I will connect it to like Mexico and people that immigrate from Mexico. Um, what I mean by that is they're seen as drug dealers and they're seen as bad people and all this kind of stuff, when in reality they're really just trying to make it different for them and their family. They're trying to live up to the American dream, which I don't want to get started on that, but I don't really think there technically is an American dream, but it's okay. We'll talk about that another time. Um, but and then when it comes to like different people that immigrate, and yes, like I'm gonna connect it to like people coming from Asia. Yes, they do have student visas, and the majority of Mexican people just cross the border illegally, but in a way, people that are immigrating from Asia kind of do the same thing. And what I mean by that is, yes, like I mentioned, they do come with a student visa, but sometimes people will keep their student visa and it's expired like by so many years or so many months, and they're just here living. But since they came on a student visa, it's fine. It's perfectly normal for them to do that. But when people of color or Mexican people immigrate and they do have the papers and they do have everything that they need to be a citizen in the US, they're still seen as bad people, as drug dealers, and they get stereotyped, when in reality, like I guess they're doing the jobs that nobody really wants to do. And I have to say, like, it connects back to Raoul Peck because he like in a way like all other races were like they just got rid of them in a way like because I feel like everybody just sees like, oh, when you come to America, like, yes, there is a lot of diversity in in certain states and stuff like that, but at the same time, like, there really isn't, and there's definitely a hierarchy when it comes to all that kind of stuff, and who's better and who's not better, and I feel like it does have to do with the color of your skin and the race, and honestly, who you know and who you know and how you know them. Like connections is everything in this world, and it's kind of sad because it's like you could literally be going to school and all of a sudden like you have a degree and stuff like that, but it doesn't matter because somebody that might not have as much experience as you is going to get the job because they knew the person hiring at that company when really you have more things that you need to do in order to do that job. But uh, and what do you have to say about this, Alexis, and the next topic?
You make a really good point, Kim. But before I discuss the third section, I wanted to touch on the first and second section from what I found. Um, just from listening to the podcast, Turning Poison into Medicine, I was able to see the impact of people not being able to be themselves within society. And also in the podcast, the professor also touched on um, how are we supposed to focus on peace and harmony when we have so much bad occurring in the world? And that really opened my eyes because it kind of helped me see the world as like a big picture. And it seems to be like when we turn on the news and stuff, it's just negative and, you know, there's not really much positivity. So, how are we as a community supposed to be positive and, try and focus on that peace that we're supposed to have? But hopefully down the road, things change and we are able to come together as a community and help establish this peace and harmony that was discussed in that podcast. The second podcast that I listened to was contemplating the dangers of essentializing labor and laborers. And this was a big impact through COVID. And it really opened my eyes again. These podcasts were really kind of deep, honestly. And it just made me see what people had gone through. I mean, we look at the essential workers as like nurses and doctors, but I think it was so much more than that. I mean, I think it could be the clerk that bags your groceries at the grocery store. Those people all had to work through this, and it's something that we should be aware of, and we should have had more respect really during COVID for those people. You have nurses and doctors that are making hundreds of $1,000s a year and getting, COVID pay and stuff, but what do the people at the grocery store get? What did they get during COVID? They still had to go in and report to their jobs. So that kind of opened my eyes to the drastic changes too with COVID and the protocols that these workers had to go through. That from what I found and what I took from the podcast, like that was pretty eye opening. And along with that, the conflicts that occurred with things like the Black Lives Matter movement but the positive outlook of that is how the community came together to support each other during that. And you had the protests and people really, speaking out and making a big kind of appearance to how they feel. And I think that helped our community come together during that time of COVID and the conflicts that we had during those couple years of COVID. The third thing was relating back to this entire semester that we've had. I think that these podcasts in general, the podcast interview that we had before, and then this podcast currently, I think doing this essentially since it's an online class, it still helps us get the idea of what other individuals are saying. So, what our classmates have to say and what our peers have to say, especially because a lot of the discussion in this class can be hard to talk about. And it can be hard to talk about because a lot of the stuff is stuff that we've never learned about, that we were never taught in school and K through 12 school. And I think that that's because it is hard to teach and it is hard to have these discussions of, these backgrounds of cultures and ethnicities and the hardships that they went through with their families and how they're still impacted today. And I personally think that everyone in every family has their own stories. And I think that that's what's helped us become a community in this class too. Touching on the second section, from the exterminating all the brutes. So Raoul Peck, he touches on, this was grabbed from the 4th episode. He discusses how the American race was made, but also how the Native American and Afro-American races would attempt to be dissolved during this process. There was an individual named Geronimo, that was his name, and he was confronted by the colonizing army, which they were on their kill anything that moves march. Geronimo helped stand up for the Apache people, and he was really well respected by most Native Americans. Unfortunately, in California, hunting Indians was legal and profitable, which was pretty shocking to learn about because I feel that we've touched on this history in grade school, and that kind of statement was never brought up because, again, going back to these hard discussions, like the episode said, in 1854, the government had paid more than $1 million to Indian hunters, and these were people that were getting paid for killing off the Indians. And I had to replay that. Honestly, I had to go back and replay that because after they said that, it was, yeah, it was a lot to take in. I'm going to touch on the third section of this podcast. And it's touching on the episode, the exterminating all the brutes. I think that the violence that has occurred against people of color and different races is still occurring today. I mean, throughout the podcast and watching that episode, really got to see other people's, impact of the death of George Floyd and other individuals that have been brutally murdered. And then also, too, the impact of these cultures and these families that have, this history of their culture being impacted by others. And just watching that episode alone, like going back to the Indian hunters and stuff, like I think that that's very, again, eye-opening. And it's stuff that we're still dealing with today. And it's not helping with bringing, back to the first section. It's not helping bringing this peace and harmony to society that we want. And I think that it's going to take a lot of change for this to, become more positive. And we're seeing the same hate crimes and violence that we saw years ago, or, our ancestors lived through, or others' ancestors lived through. So, again, I think that there's just a lot to talk about along that. And there's a lot of history that we don't know about. And that pretty much concludes what I have to say. What's your point of view on these discussions, Dominic?
Thank you, Alexis. Um, So I also want to be talking about Exterminate All the Brutes, episodes that we were watching and had been going through for the Unit 3 and to end off the semester. I want to be discussing how it brought a real life appeal to us. So through the episodes, we were able to touch upon the ideas we talked about and learned about in Unit 1 and 2, discussing the indigenous struggles and the connection that had with the migration as well. So through the episodes, we see the mistreatment and misunderstanding the Spanish had about indigenous groups, the very forceful attempt to change who they are and as people, and ultimately start an execution of individuals who wouldn't comply. So through our readings, we also saw that as well. It didn't really give us as much of a real life scenario and feeling about it. I think that through watching the episodes, it brought out emotions and gave us much more of a deeper connection with that history. Um, Ultimately, I feel that it disrupted their culture and their beliefs, and it brought upon a fear of slaughter and just a change of their whole culture. Um, I feel that wasn't right. So through the episodes, we also saw that they were able to bring everything that we read about in Unit 1 and 2 to life, and it really showed us how things were and gave us an actual visual um, of how they were trying to change a culture and a population as a whole. Um, we have seen this also become overshadowed by the avoidance of teaching in schools and ultimately creating an inaccurate idea about our history in America. So, like throughout our elementary school and middle school and high school, we were never taught about the accuracy of, we were never given accurate depiction of our history. I feel that they provide us with an inaccurate um, piece of information about each time period, and I think it was out of our country's way of just trying to disguise that history to us. So through the episodes, I also feel we were able to bring to life the events that we seem to have failed to teach and bring awareness in our own society today. So like I was saying, I feel that by watching those episodes, we were able to not only provide ourselves with the readings that we had in Unit 1 and Unit 2, but through the episodes, we were able to bring that to life and really see it as a whole. And I think that also has helped us with our own podcast and being able to express our emotions and feelings about that history and really give us a better outlook on it. So, to end off our podcast, I just want to say thank you, Professor, for providing us with this assignment, as it has allowed us all to truly open up and discuss our feelings and thoughts moving forward and within this own podcast. Thank you, and that's the end of our podcast.